This is Matthew McConaughey.
Natalie Portman.
James Patterson.
Michael Ian Black.
And you are listening to
Five Questions
with Dan Schawbel.
Jessica, welcome to Five Questions.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why did you decide to pursue a career in journalism covering politics?
I had this idea that you inform voters in a democracy so you can have a functioning society, right? And I thought that the press was the best way to inform voters. And I was driven by a do well, do good kind of philosophy. That's what my parents instilled in me. And it just seemed like becoming a White House correspondent, holding the people in power to account, explaining important issues in the world to the audience felt like a productive way to both have career success and an exciting life, and also to, in the best result, really make a difference by educating, informing, and empowering people with information.
Absolutely. I mean, you're brave, because there's no way I could have pursued that career. Not only being on CNN, but talking about subjects that are, polarizing, and everyone has different views, even if you're talking about the facts and how you see it. It's just that it's, especially in today's society, it is enormous amounts of pressure, it's responsibility. And then you don't know, there's a lot of, crazy people out there as well.
Absolutely. And that becomes more challenging over time. Now I do my work on social media where things are even more polarized sometimes. And so it's a constant balancing act of conveying a message and information clearly, and then thinking of the right words to say it so that people don't either wrongly accuse you of something you didn't intend and isn't fair, or where you're accidentally offending somebody where you didn't know you were, right? So you have to constantly stay on top of the trends and be aware of where sensitivities are these days.
That in itself has become a skill, to be honest. So you do a ton of interviews. I mean, I've done thousands. You've probably done more than that. What is the experience like interviewing U.S. presidents?
You have to come prepared because they don't have time. And so you know that you are up against the clock, and they come with a team around them. So when you're the audience watching, you just see the interviewer and the president. What is behind that is sometimes a wall of 25 people also watching you. So you come when you're in the room, that's what it looks like. So you have to come both with two things. I think of it three things in mind. The first is what are the larger questions I want to ask, the things that I think matter and where we can make a difference and it's important. Then because of how media works, you also have to think about what's the news and where do I get them on the news? What are they going to say about the news so we can be in the news cycle? That's always a thing. And that's especially true when they show up at a press briefing or in a press conference. It's that balancing act between the president has never answered a question on his drone policy. I should ask him about his drone policy. That would be important for history. But this week, the topic is something completely different. So should I ask him the completely different thing? That's a balancing act. And then the third thing is always being present, curious, and engaged in the moment so that you react to what's said. The worst is when you're in your head practicing your thing that you're planning to do, and then you don't pay close enough attention to respond to something that's said unexpectedly in the moment. That's when you actually have discovery, serendipity, and sometimes the best interviews.
Yeah, it's like controlled chaos. Things
Correct.
are crazy around you, but you have to, have your agenda, prioritize, and for sure prepare. The amount of preparation has got to be significant going into that because, it's your job and there's a lot of pressure. And you said there's a finite amount of time you have them. Absolutely.
All those things, 1,000%, plus being nimble enough to throw it all out if something else pops up, if the president says something unexpected in the moment.
Absolutely. What did you learn from your time spent at CNN that has helped you in your new venture, News Not Noise?
Oh, wow. So much. I mean, we could talk forever about what CNN offers the world. I think it's a national treasure, just the infrastructure of what that institution can do, however you feel about its newscasts. What I learned is, I guess the number one thing I learned is how to take in an enormous amount of information all day long, process it, and discern what matters, and then hone in on how to convey what matters in a way that is clear, concise, and accurate. I would say, somebody asked, I was talking with one of my friends who was a top newspaper reporter and then editor, and they said, what do you think the greatest skill is you guys have? And I'd say convey information clearly, accurately, and quickly with a very high hit rate. And how do you do that? It's just like your 10,000 hours. Like it's like being a drone pilot. It's like being a fighter pilot scanning the skyline for incomings. And you just know how to constantly scan, spot a thing that matters, zone in. Does that matter? Zoom out if it doesn't, and move on.
Nothing replaces experience. I've been interviewing people since I was 22. I've done research studies for over 10 years. Like, you have to actually do it. You can read these things in a textbook, you can watch interviews, but at the end of the day, you actually have to practice what you want to do and make those mistakes that then level you up. And one of the things that I really appreciate about my earlier career is when I've done a lot of TV as well, but early in my career, I did local TV. Yep. And so if you're making a mistake on local TV, is very different than making a mistake on the Today Show or CNBC. So I do think that even though people dream about, being on CNN, et cetera, I do think starting small can really help you, because it's better to make the mistakes early on than later on. And having that experience can really level you up and make you prepared for when you go. It's like anything, like a corporate job, everyone wants to be the CEO, but if you became the CEO tomorrow, you wouldn't be prepared, you would fail, and you'd probably never be a CEO again.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I often give that advice. You can never know what you want to do by interviewing and talking to the, most successful people in a field. That's great, but you also just have to try it. And if it's not right, you'll know and you'll move. And I always joke that because I started in local news and spent my days like making my own stories for so long, I could turn a story on grass growing. Like, I just know the formula. I know how it works. I know how to get it done. And it doesn't just give you an opportunity to make mistakes, which is important. It also gives you the confidence of having delivered over and over and knowing you can do it. And that confidence is game change.
Absolutely. The media world is incredibly fragmented. I mean, it feels like every day there's more and more outlets. We have over 1,700 TV channels, 50 streaming services, and then social media, which is like infinite. How have you been able to stand out and build an audience on this platform?
That's such a nice question. I did it with intention. I care enormously about what I do and about the audience and about why I do it. And if I had to give a single reason, that's why. I have those 10,000 hours. I know my stuff. I've become increasingly confident about expressing my sort of perspective on the news. And I think it's the passion and commitment is what the audience responds to. I started this because I spent my career, as I mentioned earlier, covering politics I covered politics for the news, right, for legacy organizations. And I kept finding that there was an audience that felt unspoken to. It was largely women, but it turns out it's women and basically anyone under the age of 40. And they are interested in what's happening in politics. They're interested in what's happening in the world. They don't often like the way we're talking about it, the tone, the valence, the negativity, the partisanship, the outrage, the fighting. And I couldn't find the space to try doing the news, I say, in a different voice inside the system. So I left and did it on Instagram on my own platform, on my own account. And I built an audience by just talking to them like a regular person about what's going on and explaining I call it news, not noise, because I say, this is what's being covered. These things are noise. You can kind of ignore them. This thing over here is the important news you have to pay attention to, and let me explain why. And I do it succinctly, I do it clearly, but I don't dumb it down. So I believe you can convey very complex ideas in a social media platform as long as the audience trusts you. And so I've just slowly over time built this relationship of trust with the audience by doing my daily reps day in and day out.
Yeah, and you definitely pay attention to trends because a lot of young people are cord cutters and people are so inundated. As you said, like it's very polarizing. People get turned off to traditional news a little bit more now than they probably did 10 years ago. And so they are looking for these voices that kind of cut to the chase. Here's the most important things and then carry on your day.
And one of the things that is, when I started doing this, I was the only person who had a news background. Like, it was an experienced journalist doing this news like this on Instagram. I was the first. And that I also think stood out because there's so many creators we trust. There are increasingly now creators who have the experience of journalism doing it on social media. But I also just love that, especially through COVID, we saw all these people who have expertise, who aren't self-generated, but have training and experience and their 10,000 hours to share, also bringing that knowledge to social media where young people and the audience lives to introduce real information and solid information that's sourced to that environment.
Definitely. And what's your best piece of career advice?
I always say, ask for what you want and do what they ask of you as long as it aligns with your integrity. So what do I mean by that? I always said to my managers when they'd have these career meetings, they tell me how my career is going in their view, and they'd ask what I think, and I'd say, my goal is to become White House correspondent. I knew that very early. That's what I wanted. And sometimes I was in Tampa, Florida, in local news, and they'd be like, well, that's cute, but you're in Tampa. And then I got to do the overnight somewhere, and they're like, well, you're on the overnights. And then I had these experiences where I was being sent out to cover, tabloid crime stories. And they'd say, you did a great job. And I'd say, I'd love to get to the White House. And they'd say, well, you're going to go cover Martha Stewart going to jail. But one day I was doing those crime stories, and the person who was the White House correspondent for my network, the morning White House correspondent, got a promotion to go to New York and be an anchor. And they had a sudden opening. And I think the executives were like, Yellin's always saying she wants a shot at this, so we're going to just put her there for a minute. And I never would have had that opportunity had I not kept raising my hand. Now, the other thing that's important to notice about that story is it took me years to get the thing I wanted. And along the way, I did what was asked of me. I did the crime stories. I did the overnights. I paid my dues. And I think one of the tension points I see these days is often people feel like, well, I should be doing the thing I want instantly. Like you said, the CEO. What I hear is, I want to be an anchor. And I say, well, that's cool. You should try being a reporter for a while because A, you pay your dues, you earn the respect of your management, then you learn how this whole business works. And when you're an anchor, you're more knowledgeable. But the bottom line is very few people leap instantly to the top. And it's that combination of being clear about your goals and willing to put in the work. And the thing that I've started adding to this advice lately is every so often in your life, do a deep dive and check in and make sure that the thing you said you wanted 5-10 years ago is still what you want, because that also can change and it's important to be able to adapt.
I completely agree. Actually, what I tell people is it's the subtle art of persistence with patience. So you got to really push for things, but know that it's going to take time to achieve big goals, big dreams like you've had. So I thank you so much for the advice and for being on the show.
Thank you. And thank you for summarizing my advice so succinctly. It's a pleasure to be here.